afternoon. My name is Bob Porter, and I'm the Vice President of Public Policy for the St. Johns County Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of the St. Johns County Chamber of Commerce and our Public Policy Committee, I welcome you today to today's panel discussion, The Current State of Play in Local, State, and Federal Reopening Policy. I'll be your moderator today for the panel discussion and will field your questions to the panelists following the presentations. To facilitate the Q&A portion of today's discussion, we ask that you submit your questions using the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's discussion, Sini CPA Advisors, LLC. They're a full-service CPA licensed in Florida and based in St. Augustine. Sini CPA Advisors offers a broad range of services for business owners, executives, and independent professionals. This morning, we're pleased to have a panel of legislative and policy pros here to discuss the current state of play of efforts to reopen the country. We're honored to have Clark Jackson, the Director of the Southeast Region Congressional Affairs Division at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Clark serves as an advocate and lobbyist, working with state and local chambers to support legislative affairs in 8 southeastern states. A former staffer for U.S. Senator Roger Wicker, Clark brings a wealth of knowledge on all matters Washington. We're also pleased to be joined by Kevin Doyle, the managing partner of Wexford Strategies, a state and federal government affairs consulting firm based out of Jacksonville. Kevin is the chairman of the board of directors of CareerSource Florida, the state government's workforce development agency. The former state staff director for U.S. Senator Mel Martinez, Kevin has years of political campaign and public policy experience in all matters Florida. And finally, I'd like to introduce Beth Sweeney, the Director of Community and Government Relations at Flagler College. Prior to joining the staff at Flagler, Beth served as the Director for Policy and Government Relations at the St. Johns County School District. She began her career as a legislative aide to Florida State Senator Rhonda Storms. Thank you, Clark, Kevin, and Beth, for being here today to share your experience and your knowledge with us. Clark, we'll start off with you setting the stage at the national level.
Thanks so much, Bob, and also to Kathy and the other folks at the St. John Chamber of Commerce for having me today. And I'm just going to go over some of the federal issues as it pertains to returning to work. And I do have a short slideshow to sort of go along that outlines some of the things that we're doing, as well as the guidelines that were released by the White House. So as we begin to look forward to businesses reopening around the country, I just want to go over a few things that we're thinking about when it comes to what we need to do to return to work. Some of the issues that are arising, particularly in states that have already begun the process. So a couple of weeks ago, the White House released their guidelines for return to work. Here, this slide shows the guidelines for employers of all phases. So for those businesses beginning to prepare for a reopening, some of the things that we're encouraging businesses to think about are social distancing, cleaning programs, and employee symptom monitoring or temperature checking. A lot of companies are either being required to or voluntarily conducting temperature checks. Now, it's not a requirement at the moment, but you may want to think about how that might be implemented at your business. Also, sanitation cleaning will be imperative, as well as personal protective equipment such as masks. And 2 issues that we're particularly pushing for more guidance and clarity on are the role of employers in monitoring the workforce for indicative symptoms, so your employees' health, and also policies and procedures for testing and contact tracing. These are areas where most employers have never had any role whatsoever. And so this raises a lot of questions about medical privacy and how we might protect workers and their privacies, but also comply with certain requirements, certain guidelines. So this next slide goes through all the different phases in the White House has released, and I'm just really going to mostly go through phase one today. That is like where you need to start beginning to think. They did release these guidelines for all employers, but phase one, I really want to draw your attention to closing down common areas and strictly enforcing social distancing. Now, these are important first steps to reopening, and you should be where you begin to think about how this works for your business. You'll also see special accommodations for vulnerable populations, which are individuals based on age. So individuals above the age of 65, as well as people with underlying health issues. And here we've raised a number of concern with regard to employers if they're providing special accommodations. So making sure that there's a safe harbor with regard to discrimination laws that prevent some types of special accommodations based on age. So we're worried about some conflicts here, some of the recommendations, and some of the requirements under existing law. Obviously, there's some requirements for specific employers. In particular, we're concerned about employers where they congregate a lot of people. So think about restaurants or bars, for example. Obviously, movie theaters and other places where the business model requires a lot of folks getting together at one time. So that's clearly not going to happen for an extended period of time, particularly not to full capacity. So we're thinking through types of special accommodations or programs to support them if we expect them to survive. So beyond what the White House has recommended, the U.S. Chamber has been working and thinking through some of the other issues regarding return to work. As I mentioned before, what's the role of employers when it comes to testing and tracing and health monitoring? We know that some large employers have already implemented testing programs for their employees. We've also talked to other large employers who are less inclined to do that, and a lot of mid-sized and smaller businesses who simply won't have the capacity or the expertise to do an on-site, on-premise testing program. So we believe there's going to require a pretty robust third-party tracing system as well, probably in addition to normal healthcare providers, whether that means pharmacists or these drive-through facilities at major retail locations, for example. A new concern that's emerging is this question of whether these new practices and procedures are issued through guidance or they're issued through regulations. So to date, CDC and OSHA, for example, have issued guidance for employers. There's this push in Congress. New York Times editorial page recently editorialized in favor of this to convert the guidance into regulations. So we're seeing some states do the same thing with their guidance, making it regulation. And we're pretty concerned that if this becomes a one-size-fits-all regulatory approach, it's going to be really difficult for employees to come back to work. Another way employers can be in trouble is legal liability. My colleagues at the U.S. Chamber Litigation Center have been tracking 300 different lawsuits that have already been filed in this period where things have been closed down. And in some states, we're seeing advertisements on TV by trial lawyer firms actually looking for people to become clients. So this is not a theoretical concern. Now, the type of liability protections that we're talking about in particular are exposure lawsuits, ones where businesses are taking all the precautions that the CDC, that OSHA, and their local public health authorities recommend, but invariably either an employee or a customer or some vendor coming in contracts the virus and alleges that the business should have done more. Remember, this is an unprecedented situation. So businesses, they want to step up and do the right thing, but we know this is an insidious virus, and even in doing all the right things, it's really hard to control its spread. But the U.S. Chamber is not is not asking for immunity for businesses. We're just asking for a safe harbor. So in the case where the CDC, OSHA, and state public health authorities issue recommendations and a business does its best to comply with those recommendations, that should be a safe harbor for them against those frivolous lawsuits. So, however, if a business is grossly negligent when or willfully forcing workers to work in unsafe conditions, then we don't believe they deserve that liability protection. So no one wants to protect bad actors here, but businesses who are trying to do the right thing shouldn't be second guessed a year later in the court of law. We're also not asking for these liability protections to last forever. We believe that they should be temporary. We know that we're going to beat this virus, and when we do, we should revert back to the status quo. But for now, we need immediate temporary targeted relief to give business owners the surety and certainty that they need to reopen and not have to worry about lawsuits. We're hopeful that the next round of coronavirus legislation that's coming out of Congress will include some form of liability protection for our country's businesses. And just recently, last week, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell expressed that no legislation will pass the Senate without it. So that gives us a pretty good assumption that we will get some form of legal liability protection for businesses. The next issue that we're seeing is this patchwork of rules. So to give you an indication of how absurd some of these patchworks have been, we just talked to a national company that operates in all 50 states. They're currently tracking 2,000 different requirements across state and local governments, including, for example, multiple jurisdictions that require temperature checks, but they've decided on different levels of temperature as the cutoff point. So you can imagine if you're operating in one county and 100-degree temperature, you're fine. And then the next county, 101, you're fine. And then the third county, 99.5, and you have to go home. You can imagine the chaos that creates for businesses. So our team in DC is engaging members of Congress right now to provide that legal protection, those safe harbors, that we maintain the right to guidance and we adopt the best of what works without becoming overly litigious or regulatory in the approach to reopening. So we've got a lot more work to be done on this, but the Chamber sent a letter to the White House, to governors, and to mayors across the country that outlines all of these concerns and some of our ideas for guidance for businesses. We're also in the process of working with committee leadership in Congress on legislation to protect businesses as they begin bringing their employees back to work. So lastly, the U.S. Chamber has a multitude of resources on our website at uschamber.com. We've also created a Save Small Business initiative where you can access our resources and our webinars and get daily information on the coronavirus efforts, which are very helpful, particularly as we begin to look towards reopening. So visit uschamber.com/save-small-business for more information on the Save Small Business campaign. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Bob. Let me stop sharing my screen.
Clark, that's great. Thank you so much for that overview. And I can tell you personally, I use the U.S. Chamber's website almost daily, if not every other day, just to get current up-to-date information. So I echo your recommendation that people mark that website and go down to it because it really does contain a wealth of information. Kevin, I guess you're up to tell us the latest and the greatest about what's going on within our state of Florida.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Bob, and thanks to the St. Johns County Chamber of Commerce for hosting us today. As a St. Augustine High School graduate, I won't say which year, but it was many, many years ago. But it's always a pleasure to join the St. Johns County Chamber, and great job on all the work that you're doing as a resource for the local community from Ponte Vedra to St. Augustine throughout the entire county. So thank you all. It's interesting times for sure. And I know I think we were very fortunate in the state of Florida to have Governor DeSantis and our leadership team there. And to compare to other states like New York and some of the northern states, I think Florida is in a lot better shape than many places of America. So, as you all know, we're in the middle of phase one of recovery. And typically these phases, depending on the data, should last 2 to 3 weeks as long as the health data continues to show a decline moving forward. Right now, so far, as to be expected, as folks are starting to reopen, I think you'll see kind of a stabilization and maybe a slight increase in some of the numbers just because folks are more out and about in the community. But I think folks are pretty cautiously optimistic that we could get to a phase 2 in the coming weeks, which would definitely allow for additional capacities to be obtained, whether it's restaurants going up to, I think, 75% capacity, bars and theaters being reopened. I know there's been talk about, hair salons and things like that kind of getting reopened as well. I saw where even Disney Springs is reopening on May 20th. So all good signs with the Florida economy, especially in the tourism industry, considering how important that is to the state of Florida, and in particular here in St. Johns County. Our firm, we had the pleasure to represent one of St. Augustine's, favorite places, the St. Augustine Lighthouse and Maritime Museum. And I know they're getting excited about reopening, I believe, on Monday of next week on a limited basis, but definitely a great first step. And in a future call, I'll give you an update on, and maybe in person, on our National Heritage Area initiative that's moving along nicely in Congress. But that's to in a future conversation. But a great project for the entire region. Very happy to see the St. Augustine Lighthouse back up and at 'em next week. But tourism, Visit Florida is going to be playing a huge role in the state as far as marketing. It's amazing that it just seems like yesterday we're in special session in Tallahassee and talking about the role of Visit Florida, and now it's going to be taking the front and center stage as far as helping to communicate the messaging out across the country that Florida is open for business, and I think they're going to be playing a very important role. So that's a great resource for all of us in Northeast Florida to have. I also serve as the chair of the State Workforce Board, Career Source Florida, and we are, moving forward as well, anticipating as the state continues to reopen, to being on the front lines to help folks get reemployed, get retraining, and to help folks and businesses find the workforce that they need. I know just a couple of months ago that I think one of the big challenges was identifying, able workforce resources to get, qualified staff into businesses. So it's a, kind of 180-degree turnaround on what we'll be looking at and moving forward. But as chair of the board, happy to be a resource to you and your members as we look at helping restart the Florida economy. We, the 24 local workforce development boards within Career Source Florida's network, are providing employment and business support services virtually via email and over the phone. And then some of the workforce offices are also opened in person by appointment only, but the Career Source in North Florida, Gulf Coast, Pinellas, and then I'll keep you updated as well on the Career Source Northeast Florida as things develop there. But we're all, getting ready to get folks back to work, and hopefully that happens soon. I know Career Source Florida, our website is careersourceflorida.com. We have some great resources there for small businesses and for employers and employees and folks looking for work. We have a Help Us Here campaign. That's a comprehensive resource for employment and business services. So all kinds of tools that are available for you as well. I know DEO is in the process of still processing on reemployment claims, and it does seem like we definitely are turning the corner and getting a lot of good data there, and folks are getting processed at a very speedy clip. So we'll continue to watch that. And I saw some numbers earlier today too, where the PPP loan program through Congress still has about 40% available funds from the last authorization. So if you're a small business out there in Florida, definitely look into that, as there's still funding available. And like Clark said, there definitely will be some more bites at the apple on the federal level, but on the state level as well, the state of Florida will be getting a few $1 billion from the CARES Act and maybe some more in additional future federal legislation. So a special session in Tallahassee is probably likely. We're looking at probably closer to the summertime. The governor still has some time before the budget needs to be signed and other bills need to be acted upon until July 1. But I would definitely anticipate a special session coming up to allocate some of the federal funding that's been allocated to the states, but also just to kind of reprioritize certain things that maybe not be priorities just a few months ago during the regular session. So I definitely encourage all businesses. I know the chamber will be leading the way to reach out to your state legislators here in St. Johns County and in the Northeast Florida region, and of course leadership as well, to ensure that St. Johns County business priorities are heard and advocated for in Tallahassee. But with that said, I'll pass it back to you, Bob. And again, just thank you for the great opportunity today to be part of this panel. Looking forward to some Q&A, and looking forward to working with the St. Johns County Chamber and additional in the future. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Kevin. That's very good information, current information to have. Next up is Beth Sweeney with Flagler College. Beth?
Bob and everyone online today, thank you for having me. Thank you to the Chamber for putting this on. Again, I'm Beth Sweeney, the Director of Community and Government Relations with Flagler College. I'm here to share with you a little bit about what's going on locally as far as regulations go. We know that right now our cities and counties, our St. Johns County and the city of St. Augustine and the beach have all kind of been working together to stay on the same page. We know that they have largely adopted the same sort of restrictions that the state has put on as part of phase one. So the governor's executive order did allow local governments to put in stricter guidelines for reopening, but our local elected officials have adopted what the state has adopted. And so that is in line with the allowing the restaurants to open at 25% of capacity with unlimited capacity for outdoor seating, as long as social distancing is practiced. The tables are set 6 feet apart. And what we've seen has been interesting is some local governments, we've seen the city of Jacksonville came out yesterday allowing, and I know other municipalities around the state have taken this position where they are suspending local code enforcement and changing some of those zoning regulations to allow for additional outdoor seating for restaurants. And so this is kind of one creative way that we're seeing local governments try to help our economy and businesses, provide them additional capacity beyond what the original order of the state did. And so we'll see if the city of St. Augustine does anything with that. I haven't seen anything come up yet, but Jacksonville just announced that. Of course, with the state order, the prohibition on vacation rentals continues. That's, we know, been a big issue locally. So that prohibition does continue with the executive order. We are seeing, obviously, the beaches open up more. I know the county announced that driving on the beach will resume on Monday. And I think once that happens, we will be back to normal with the beaches. So there'll be no more restrictions in place. The county will be looking on Tuesday to look to whether they're going to extend the local state of emergency. I think they're doing that every week, and so they'll do that again on Tuesday. They'll be meeting to vote on that. I think our local governments have really been trying to do all they can to put resources in place for the business community. The county met this week and adopted resolutions to implement a new grant program for businesses. They received $250,000 from the county's Industrial Development Authority, and they are putting plans in place for a grant up to $5,000 to businesses to offset the temporary loss of revenue that they've experienced due to COVID. And so you can check out their website. There's information on there about the details for eligibility, but you have to be a business with 5 to 20 employees and been in operation for at least a year. And then these funds can be used to help cover the cost of rent, your mortgage, utilities, or payroll. You cannot have received any other federal funds. So none of that, you have to have applied but not received the PPP, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan or SBA loans, any of those type of loans. So this is really meant to kind of be a bridge to help tide you over. The county has also put together small business recovery kits that you can contact them about getting. So businesses with 5 to 50 employees, they have to be currently open. The kits include gloves, masks, and hand sanitizer, and so those are available through the county. The county also has CBD CDBG grants for businesses with up to 50 employees, and rental assistance. We've also seen the county reduce building fees temporarily. So they have issued a 30% reduction in building fees from May 1st to August 4th. And those are for building services fees, fire plan review fees, and development review fees. And so I think they, like I said, they're doing a lot to try to provide financial assistance and resources. Of course, our local governments, in alignment with the governor's executive order, continue to encourage the use of masks and social distancing guidelines from the CDC. And then our city, again, kind of the same regulations, and they, I'm sure most of you have read about it, but they are still taking applicants for anyone who wants to participate in the thermometer program. And then they also have been working with a supplier to secure a large number of masks for local businesses. And so I'm told those are due in actually today. So unless there are some holdups, they should be releasing more information early next week about distributing those masks to businesses. And so we're seeing a lot of resources put in place. At Flagler, we are kind of in the same boat as most businesses. As most of you know, we moved all of our courses for students online in March. And so we are slowly developing plans on bringing employees back to campus. And then what we're going to do come fall with students, our intent is to have face-to-face classes for our students in the fall. So putting those guidelines in place for returning students and the cleanliness of campus and all of those things that Clark talked about, that all of everyone in the business community is working hard to make sure that we are providing a safe environment. And that's kind of, I'll put in a plug too, Flagler, our adult and continuing ed. It has free courses for anyone who would like to take those. On our website, there are 3 courses. One was released in April, one was released in May, and one will be released in June. But you can take them anytime during that period, so they're all still available. But those are free courses on innovation and creativity and critical thinking, and so some nice things to help sharpen your skills during this time. And so those are free, and those are on our website for anyone interested in taking them. So, thank you.
Thank you, Beth. That's great. At this time, we'd like to open the floor for questions, and that if you have a question, if you'd please type your question in the chat box, not the Q&A box, but the chat box. We will start going through them. In the meantime, I've gotten quite a few questions that were submitted from email over the last couple of days once our announcement went out. And I'm going to start throwing these out to the panel. Clark, could we start with you? Couple of questions that have come in. Who actually, I know that you mentioned in your presentation the idea of recommendations versus regulation. And one of the questions that we've gotten quite often is, who actually has the authority to open state and county and cities to business? Who do the businesses look to for this notification? And are the different authorities at the national, state, and local level actually talking to each other?
Bob, that's a good question. So to go backwards, no, at this point, states and localities aren't doing a good job of talking to each other, which is why it's important that that the state release their own their own guidance and regulations across the state. And then, of course, the federal government would supersede that if they had any sort of guidance or recommendations. At this point, we're hoping that Congress will pass some sort of legislation that and then we hope at this point, too, that Congress doesn't go as far as making any regulatory changes. We've seen in the past when you have some sort of natural disaster or economic disaster, like the downturn in 2008, for example, we got Dodd-Frank, and after 9/11, we got the TSA, and some of those have some good protections included in them, but we don't want to move into a regulatory state where we regulate ourselves out of this in order to allow businesses to really get back to work and get the economy up and humming again. So I'm not sure if that answers your question completely, but I think from where we stand at the national, for this to stay as local as possible, for this to stay within guidelines and not regulations, but also make sure that folks are talking to each other and that we have a national blanket as opposed to a patchwork of regulations among states.
Okay, no, that helps me quite a bit, actually. Kevin and Beth, Kevin, you mentioned that you fully expect to see a special session of the legislature. And one of the questions that we've gotten, especially in light of the, I guess, reported $750 million in decline in Florida state sales tax revenue just from the month of April, and I've seen estimates as high that it could grow into the billions of dollars of lost sales tax revenue by the end of this current fiscal year, which is June 30th. Does the legislature hold a special session before? Because I know they have not sent their budget that they passed a couple of months ago to the governor. What do you think? Does the legislature hold a special session before June 30th, or do they wait until sometimes later this summer to kind of sort out the new reality of budget shortfalls?
No, I think that's a good question. And from what I'm hearing, it'll probably be later on in the summer, just so they can take into account how the reopening has occurred throughout the state. I mean, we still have Miami, Broward, and Palm Beach County, which are still not in phase 1 yet. I think that should be happening soon, but that's a third of our population, and a huge part of our economic engine is down Southeast Florida. So we need to get that back online as well. But I think too there's also a delay as well to see how much more federal dollars will be sent to the state. So I would imagine, just taking a educated guess, would probably be later on in the summer. The governor still has until June 30th to address the budget that was passed. The legislature did put aside quite a bit of money in reserves, and there are some options there also to look at, to find some additional funding to kind of, plug in some of the short-term holes that are in the budget right now. But you're spot on though. The sales tax decline, I mean, that's, we don't have an income tax in Florida, which is great for all of us that live in Florida, but we are dependent on sales tax to fund a lot of our general revenue. In addition to that, gas tax as well. And if nobody's driving, that obviously, impacts that too. One of my other day jobs is the director for Florida for Consumer Energy Alliance. We are very, happy the fact that it's a great thing that we're going to have affordable, reliable energy for the short term, moving forward, just because of all the, energy development that we've had in our country. So, the last hit in the late, 2008, 2009, if you remember, energy prices are through the roof. But so at least now, when folks start to reopen, you can have pretty affordable energy costs to help get folks to the state. So you're not going to see, $4 a gallon gas, or, airline, surcharge fees for fuel or things like that. So that's definitely a positive. So hopefully with a staged reopening, and if things go as planned, hopefully the bulk of the financial damage was happening now. We can slowly but surely kind of, get our way back to as close to normal as possible. But again, in Florida, we've been fortunate that our state leadership has taken a very practical approach at addressing the situation, and our legislature has done a very great job at making sure we have reserve funding. So we're not like some of the other states like Illinois and New York and New Jersey, where you have pension issues and other state shortfalls in addition to addressing COVID-19. So I think we're in a lot better shape than other states for sure. But definitely going back to the original question, I would say probably, I would have to say later this summer for sure, especially with some of the federal funding, and to kind of see the impact moving forward.
And I would agree with Kevin on that. I think it's going to be later. I think that they're looking to gather as much data as they can, and to see as things begin to open what the reality is with revenue. I will say I have been told by several legislators to anticipate a large number of vetoes when the governor does sign the budget. And so I think if anybody has a project that they care about in the state budget, I would put a lot of effort right now into making sure the governor's office knows the importance of those projects, because I would anticipate a lot of vetoes.
Okay, well, that's helpful information, I think. So basically, you think that the current budget, other than what is vetoed by the governor, individual projects will basically set the stage for a special session come July or August.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Beth, I've got a question, I think, for you. As businesses and educational institutions reevaluate their service delivery methods, what do you see as the infrastructure priorities that our legislators need to improve to support them as we return to kind of this new normal of, an example would be, of digital business, and in St. Johns County in particular, the importance of, say, enhanced fiber optic communication lines to allow our businesses to continue operating.
Well, I think the example that you gave is probably right on. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we see, as there's been a giant shift to online learning, both in higher ed and in K-12, and just in businesses in general, with everyone working from home. The need to see increased bandwidth is critical. I think, I have a background in K-12 policy work too, and so we've obviously seen there's a huge divide there for students, with those with technology and those without. And I think school districts have done a great job around the state in trying to get devices into the hands of students. But even if you can give a child a device, there may not be adequate Wi-Fi coverage in their area. And so really anything that the state can do to beef up that coverage and make sure that there are no dead zones in our state is going to be critical as we move forward with this. And I think there have been plans I've seen many years ago on doing this. And so it's not anything new. And I think the Department of Education is well aware of it. I think, I know AT&T was part of the reopening task force. And so I know that they're working on this. And so I think it's at the forefront of everyone's minds. How can we ensure that coverage is available across the state? And so I think that's probably the most critical piece right now, is the access to technology and the bandwidth coverage.
That's great. Thank you. That's very helpful information. Here's an interesting, I said I wouldn't do this, but I'm actually going to throw this out to the entire panel. And the question is, I'd like to know, and this came from our email, but I'd like to know what trends the panelists are seeing in the future that COVID-19 is causing in your own workplace. What kind of changes have your organization made to accommodate COVID-19 and still allow for a productive workforce and doing business? Anybody care to give that one a shot?
Hey, Bob, this is Clark. So I'm happy to take a first shot at it. And we're a little different than a lot of businesses in the sense that the U.S. Chamber has 550 employees, so that's not even considered a small business anymore. And so it'll differ from folks at the small business level, but I just got off a call this morning, a Zoom call, of course, and our president was saying that moving forward, realizing how much we can still do from working at home with greater flexibility, how we've been churning out productivity levels beyond what we have been even prior. That could be because we're in such a need right now. But, instilling some greater flexibility between work-life balance once we come back to normal work lives, given that, they've seen that folks can do both working from home and having greater flexibility and continuing to produce good products.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'll echo Clark. I mean, our office, we have offices. I run the Florida operations and oversee the Southeast for our shop. We have offices throughout the country in DC, Chicago, Texas, Colorado, the Midwest and Northeast. But, we're seeing a lot more, short term, the Zoom and the virtual meetings. But I really do think we'll probably, revisit how much, because like Clark said, our productivity, I actually feel almost busier now than I did before in many ways. But we're going to see like maybe some of the business travel may be curtailed, at least in the short term. I still think there's nothing like an in-person meeting, an in-person event, in-person. I think it's the best way to do business. But there might be opportunities where I think technology is definitely going to be playing a lot bigger role. And that's something that we'll be looking at moving forward.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. That's kind of the personal touch. Beth, did you have anything to add?
I nothing really new. I think I would echo all of that. I think obviously we've seen the trend to be working from home and that flexibility that affords people, and that we can be productive. It really, I think, causes everyone to look at the traditional 40-hour work week, and hopefully we'll see some flexibility come from that. I think it's also, I think it causes you to kind of reevaluate your business model. It causes you to, focus in on your real priorities. I know, we kind of at the college have really ensured that everyone's attention was shifted to ensuring that our students had, the best experience possible when we had to cancel graduation, when we had, to move everyone out of the dorms. And so our whole world shifted overnight, it feels like. And so it really, I think everyone at the college, the students have always been our focus, but it really became laser focused in ensuring that they had a quality experience. And so I think for a lot of businesses, this is an opportunity to really refocus on your mission and what you're about, and how, different delivery methods might be able to enhance what you were already doing.
Okay, thank you for that. Clark, I want to come back to you for a minute. I know you touched on it a little bit, that there's an expectation that there will be now a round 4 of a federal relief package, and just wondering any thoughts you might have on what that legislation might contain, and really as much from a chamber perspective. And I know a lot of people have wondered about this, but what are the chances that 501c6s, like our chamber, like every other, virtually every other chamber in the country, and nonprofit trade associations, could be included in the next round of PPP legislation?
Okay, so there were a couple questions there. I'll start first with where we are in DC, and we're seeing now that the first PPP funding ran out in a couple of weeks, and our initial expectation was this round of PPP funding would run out within 48 hours. And we were way wrong about that. PPP funding is still not run out at this point. So it's not putting the pressure on Congress like they did before to really quickly put something together. So we're hopeful that's a positive thing, meaning that we'll get legislation that's a little bit more thought through, that includes extensions beyond PPP and EIDL to other policy concerns like liability protections. It's some infrastructure. We don't expect to see a true infrastructure package, not in phase 4. It's something we had hoped for in the beginning, but it's becoming more and more clear that that's not going to be an option in phase 4. But maybe some forms of infrastructure beyond, a large scale package like broadband funding or something along those lines. And then, of course, some probably more funding for PPP in this next tranche of phase 4. And then to answer your last question, it's been a large concern of not only your chamber, but chambers all across the country of, 501c6s or chambers of commerce and economic development organizations are really on the front lines of us all coming back to work, and providing resources to businesses so they feel comfortable getting back to work, so that they've had up-to-date information during this crisis. And to leave them out of the PPP funding we felt was very unfair. And we're seeing a lot more support in Congress to include C6s. Legislation was introduced this week by Congressman Pappas and Congressman Fitzpatrick in the House, and it has about 20 co-sponsors at this point, that includes C6s up to 300 employees. We're supportive of that legislation. We expect Senator Cassidy in the Senate to be putting out some sort of legislation, not a companion bill, but something along the lines that includes C6s, possibly other Cs as well, like C4s. And we're hopeful that will be included. Speaker Pelosi said earlier this week on a call with businesses that she was supportive of including C6s. So that's a positive. That's definitely positive. And, we have a broad support in the Senate as well. So very hopeful, and we're definitely getting closer and closer there.
Well, that's great. Thank you. That gives us a little hope as well here at the chamber. Here's an interesting question for Kevin and Beth. With more and more people starting to move around as a result of the relaxing of the stay-at-home guidelines and the businesses reopening, how does testing get expanded in Florida or in the county or in the city so that it'll be readily available to those working directly with the public every day, whether or not they're symptomatic? Any thoughts on that?
No, it's a good question, and I know Florida is one of the states that's leading the country as far as putting more and more tests out there in the public space and providing locations where folks can go to get tests, whether it's like in Jacksonville down the street at the stadium from our office, or at different pharmacies around the state as well. But I think that the data that's coming back, it is truly remarkable how much data that we are getting. And I think the next trend will actually be too the antibody tests that they're developing as well, to see which folks have that, and which folks, and it does look likely that if you have the antibodies from the coronavirus, then you have some sense of immunity, maybe short term, maybe long term for it. But I think it's a work in progress in many ways, because it's scaling up. But Florida is definitely, compared to other states, is leading the country as far as getting the test out there. I think also too, it's important, whether it's looking at folks either flying into our airports or coming in across the state from areas that may be hotspots, to continue to do the checks, with folks, just to ensure that our numbers don't go up. We want to keep things safe. And again, the end goal is to, one, reopen the economy in a safe phased way, but also to ensure we have the capacity at our hospitals around the state as well.
Yeah, and I'll just, I believe that it was announced recently that the antibody testing will be available at the Jacksonville drive-through lot at the Lot J. So if anyone does want to go, and I think it's important for people to know too that at this point you can go to any testing site and be tested. You do not have to have symptoms. You do not have to have a doctor's order. You should be able to go if you feel like you want to be tested and get tested. So I think the state is working hard at expanding the availability of testing, and that, you know, the executive order too, that anyone coming to Florida from a hotspot is still required to self-quarantine for 14 days. And so that was extended in the governor's latest executive order. And so I think it's important that that message remains out there.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Got time for one more question. And this one came in over our chat. I'm going to actually combine two of them together for Beth and or Kevin, but probably Beth. From whom can businesses acquire these thermometers and face masks, and any idea on how the face masks would be distributed to businesses? And also, have you heard anything about either the county or the city looking into the possibility of distributing hand sanitizer?
I have not heard anything about hand sanitizer other than the kits that the county is distributing. And I think there's information on their website about it. There's information on their social media. Those kits for small businesses do have, I think, just a single bottle of hand sanitizer. I don't know how large it is. But there is hand sanitizer in those kits that the county is giving out to businesses. As far as the thermometers and the masks go with the city, I believe you can just contact probably anyone at the city and let them know that you'd like to participate. That's the KINZA, the SMART thermometer program that they are doing. I think they're still, like I said, I talked to them yesterday, and they are still taking volunteers to participate in that program. So you can contact them. I'll throw my friend Meredith Bridenstine out there, the assistant city manager. I know she's deep in the thick of it, so you can ask for her. And then the same thing with the masks. I believe she is helping to coordinate the distribution of those masks. I believe they placed a pretty large order, and so you can reach out to the city. Like I said, they were anticipating getting the masks in today. I know sometimes there's some holdups, but they'll have more information, I think, going out to media early next week about how businesses can then get those masks. So I hope that answered the question.
I think so. Thank you. That's good information. Well, folks, we have just about run out of time for this webinar, but before we close today, I'd like to acknowledge the sponsor of today's panel discussion, CPA, Senior CPA Advisors. Thank you for your support of this event and your support of the Chamber. I encourage you to visit the Chamber's website at sjcchamber.com and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram for current and updated information and resources relating to the opening, reopening, and recovery. And on behalf of the Chamber's Public Policy Committee, I really want to thank our panelists, Clark Jackson, Kevin Doyle, and Beth Sweeney, for sharing their expertise with us today. It's wonderful having the ability to hear from real experts as we continue these webinars and conversations. And so thank you very much for that. Today's discussion, for everybody listening, was recorded, and it'll be available on the Chamber's website under Chamber Webinars for playback at a later date. Thank you, everybody, for your attendance and participation, and stay safe.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, St. John's Chamber. Appreciate it.